Welcome back to Crowned Black Heroes, where we tell the real, raw stories of black men and women who changed the course of history, even when the world tried to erase them. Tonight's story begins with a woman whose hands were cracked from scrubbing other people's laundry, who slept on a floor so her daughter could have a bed, and who was born just 2 years after the end of slavery. By the time she died, she was being called the first self-made female millionaire in America. But as you'll see, that title is more complicated than most people realize. Stay with me until the end, because the truth behind her rise, and what it cost, and who else should be standing next to her in our memory, will surprise you. Our story begins on December 23, 1867, in the Reconstruction South, in a place still haunted by the Civil War. In a tiny cabin in Delta, Louisiana, a baby girl named Sarah Breedlove took her first breath. She was the first in her family born free. Her parents, Owen and Minerva, had been enslaved on the same plantation, where they were now trying to raise children as freed people. Free on paper, but still trapped in poverty, still surrounded by the same fields, the same white landowners, the same danger. Sarah's childhood did not unfold like the story of a future millionaire. It unfolded like a survival manual. By the age of 7, both of her parents were dead, likely from the disease and brutal conditions that killed so many formerly enslaved people who had never had access to proper medical care. Orphaned, she moved in with her older sister Lavinia and brother-in-law and was sent to work as a domestic servant in Mississippi. There was no time for school, no quiet afternoons with books. The only alphabet she knew was the rhythm of work: scrubbing, cooking, sweeping, carrying. She wasn't learning math and reading, she was learning how to endure. Imagine this: other children learning letters on a chalkboard, while Sarah's classroom was a washboard, her fingers raw from washing other people's clothes in cold water. The only numbers that mattered were how many bundles she could wash in a day, how many coins they brought in, how far those coins could stretch. That's where the phrase that would later define her story began: from washerwoman to millionaire. At 14, in a world that pushed black girls into womanhood far too early, she married a man named Moses McWilliams. Some historians believe she did it in part to escape the abuse of her brother-in-law, because for a poor black girl in the Deep South, the choices were often marry, suffer, or run. At 20, she gave birth to her only child, a little girl she named Lelia. For a moment, there was a fragile kind of hope: a woman, a man, a baby, and the dream that maybe the next generation would have it a little easier. But life had another blow waiting. When Sarah was only 20, Moses died. Just like that, she was a widowed single mother with a small child in a country that offered almost nothing to black women except the hardest jobs and the lowest wages. So she did the only thing she could. She packed what little she had and joined the wave of black Southerners moving north and west, looking for any place that felt even slightly less dangerous than the plantations. She landed in St. Louis, Missouri, not a promised land, but a city where 3 of her brothers worked as barbers. There, Sarah found work as a laundress, earning little more than $1 a day. Think about that: sunrise to sunset, hauling water, boiling it over a fire, scrubbing dirt out of heavy fabrics by hand, ironing with hot metal irons, all for barely enough to pay rent and buy food. She rented a tiny room and often slept on the floor so that Lelia could have the bed. Still, she did something powerful. She joined St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she was surrounded by black women who were teachers, club organizers, and community leaders. Watching them, she began to dream of something beyond the wash tub. But there was another problem, one that was deeply personal and painfully visible. Like many black women of her time, Sarah's hair was falling out. Scalp diseases, harsh lye soaps used for cleaning clothes, poor diet, and the stress of constant labor took a toll. She suffered from severe dandruff, scalp infections, and bald spots. For many people today, hair is about style. For her, it was connected to dignity, respectability, and survival. If you looked unkempt in a world already determined to see you as less, doors, the very few that even existed, closed even faster. Her brothers, the barbers, taught her some basics of hair care. Other women recommended home remedies. Nothing seemed to really solve the problem. And then something happened that would quietly change everything. She met the work of another black woman whose name you rarely hear when people talk about Madam C.J. Walker, Annie Turnbow Malone. Annie Malone was a brilliant black entrepreneur who had been experimenting with hair products that didn't burn or damage black women's hair. She developed a product she called Wonderful Hair Grower and built a company around it, hiring black women as sales agents. Around 1904, Sarah became one of those agents in St. Louis, selling Malone's products door to door. She watched, listened, and learned about hair, about business, and about the power of speaking directly to the needs of black women. This is important. Before she became Madam C.J. Walker, Sarah was a tired laundress, yes, but she was also a saleswoman, watching how another black woman built an empire. And this is where our story starts to split. One path leading to a household name, the other to a woman history almost buried. Hold that thought because we're coming back to Annie. In 1905, at the age of 37, an age when many people of her era were considered old, Sarah moved again, this time to Denver, Colorado. She arrived with little more than Hope, her daughter, a few savings, and a head full of lessons learned in St. Louis. In Denver, she initially kept selling Annie Malone's products. But in the quiet hours at home, she began to experiment with her own formula, mixing oils, ointments, and ideas, chasing a dream that felt almost impossible for a poor black woman in Jim Crow America, building her own brand. Denver is also where she met Charles Joseph Walker, a newspaper man who would become her third husband and her partner in business. Marriage to him gave her a new name and a new persona. She began calling herself Madam C.J. Walker, borrowing the Madam from French beauty entrepreneurs who used it to signal elegance and professionalism. Together, they crafted an image: Madam Walker, hair culturist and beauty pioneer. Her flagship product? Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grower, a formula based on ointments and scalp treatment techniques that had roots in practices used by other black hair care innovators, including Malone. The exact recipe is debated by historians, but what matters for our story is this. It worked for her and for the women she tested it on. Their hair grew stronger, their scalps healed, their self-confidence changed. So how do you sell a dream in a world built to tell you that you're nothing? Madam Walker went door to door. She stood in cramped kitchens and on front porches, product in hand, and talked to black women about their hair, their lives, and their futures. She demonstrated how to wash the hair gently, how to massage the scalp, how to use her pomade, how to use a pressing comb for styling, what later became known as the Walker system. But she wasn't just selling a jar of ointment. She was selling a new way of seeing themselves, not as washed out and unpresentable, but as polished, professional, and worthy. From Denver, she traveled across the South and Midwest with Charles, building a network. Her daughter Lelia stayed behind at first to manage the mail order side of the business, packing boxes, answering letters, and keeping track of payments. It was a family hustle, powered by belief and exhaustion. In 1908, Madam Walker opened a beauty parlor and a training school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called Lelia College, named after her daughter. There, she trained hair culturists, not just hairdressers, but professional women who learned the Walker system and then went into their own communities to teach and sell. It was direct sales. Decades before companies like Avon or Mary Kay became household names, and it was designed specifically to give black women jobs, independence, and pride. But the real empire began to take shape in 1910, when Madam Walker moved her base to Indianapolis, Indiana. Why Indianapolis? It was a city with good rail connections, a growing black community, and space to build. There, she bought property and constructed a factory, a hair salon, a beauty school, and a laboratory. The headquarters of the Ed, Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. Picture it, an early 20th century factory floor, but instead of being another place where black women did the lowest paid, hardest work, this one was owned by a black woman. Many of the managers were black women. Chemists in white lab coats tested formulas designed for black hair. Sales orders poured in from around the country, from agents who were building their own customer lists and their own financial independence. Madam Walker offered them more than commission checks. She sold them the idea of being Walker agents, smartly dressed women who walked into homes with briefcases, product kits, and the authority of someone who represented a successful, black-owned corporation. She insisted they be neat, disciplined, and prepared. For women who had been confined to kitchens and fields, that transformation alone was revolutionary. By now, you might be wondering, where is the millionaire part? How does a woman born on a plantation go from making $1 a day to being listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the first female self-made millionaire in America? The answer is step by step, sale by sale, city by city, and with a strategy that was always bigger than hair. As her business grew, Madam Walker didn't just collect money, she collected influence. She donated to churches, YMCAs, schools, and organizations like Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute. She helped fund a YMCA in Indianapolis's black community, giving young people a safe space to gather. She gave scholarships to students at historically black schools, and she was not shy about her ambitions. At a National Negro Business League convention in 1912, surrounded mostly by men, she stood up and said words that still echo today. I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub. From there, I was promoted to the cook kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and preparations. I have built my own factory on my own ground. Think about the power of that sentence. She didn't say someone lifted her up. She said she promoted herself, but the world around her was on fire. The same era that saw Madam Walker's rising fortune also saw lynchings, race riots, and a ferocious backlash against any sign of black progress. When white mobs attacked black communities, as in the East St. Louis riots of 1917, she didn't stay silent. She used her money to support anti-lynching campaigns and civil rights organizations like the NLEACP, helping to fund their efforts to pass federal laws against lynching and to defend black Americans who were under attack. With wealth came a new kind of visibility. She built a lavish estate in Irvington-on-Hudson, New York, called Villa Lewaro, named for her daughter, Lelia Walker Robinson, Lewaro. The mansion became a gathering place for artists, activists, and black elites of the Harlem Renaissance. Imagine walking into that house. Black professionals, writers, and entertainers mingling in a home built by a woman whose grandparents had been enslaved. The very existence of Villa Lewaro was a political statement. A black woman could build a palace on the banks of the Hudson River and open its doors to her people. By the time of her death in 1919, estimates of her wealth ranged from $500,000 to $1 million, the equivalent of many millions today. She was described in newspapers as the wealthiest black woman in America, and her estate, company, and example lived on through her daughter Alelia and the generations of black entrepreneurs she inspired. That's the story most people know, the orphaned laundress who became the first self-made female millionaire in America. It's powerful. It's true, in the sense that her wealth, unlike many others, is well documented. It's the version that ends on a triumphant note. Hard work, determination, ingenuity, and faith turning cotton field poverty into factory owner wealth. But here, on this channel, we don't stop at the surface. We dig deeper, because Black history is never as simple as a slogan. So let's go back to that woman we met briefly earlier, Annie Turnbow Malone. While Madam Walker's story is the one stamped into Guinness records and repeated in textbooks, a growing number of historians have pointed out that Annie Malone may actually have become a millionaire first. Born in 1877 in Illinois to formerly enslaved parents, she developed her own hair care products in the early 1900s, a time when Black women's hair was often damaged by harsh chemicals and hot irons. She created a product called Wonderful Hair Grower and built a company around it, hiring a network of Black women agents to sell door to door. Sound familiar? By 1918, Annie Malone had opened Poro College in St. Louis, a massive complex that included a manufacturing plant, beauty school, auditorium, dormitories, a roof garden, and more. It served not only as a training center in cosmetology, but also as a hub for Black social and cultural life. At its peak, Poro employed hundreds of people in St. Louis and tens of thousands of agents worldwide. Tax records show that in the 1920s, she was paying what would today be the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes, a sign of immense wealth. And remember, Annie Malone is the woman whose products Sarah Breedlove, Madam Walker, originally sold as a commission agent in St. Louis and Denver. Their relationship eventually turned into rivalry, with accusations that Walker had copied Malone's formulas, although the truth is more nuanced and debated. What isn't debated is this: they were both brilliant, both determined, and both building something unprecedented in an America that wanted neither of them to succeed. So why does nearly everyone know the name Madam C.J. Walker, while fewer people know Annie Malone? Part of the answer lies in documentation. Madam Walker's great-great-granddaughter, Alelia Bundles, became a journalist and biographer who carefully collected and published detailed records of Walker's life and finances. Journalists, historians, and even Guinness World Records lean on that evidence when they call her the first female self-made millionaire in America, while acknowledging that others, like Annie Malone or Mary Ellen Pleasant, might have reached that milestone earlier, but without the same paper trail. Part of the answer also lies in timing, narrative, and myth-making. Walker died in 1919 at the height of her fame. Her story fit neatly into a rising Black middle-class dream in the early 20th century. The poor washerwoman turned respectable businesswoman turned philanthropist. It's an origin story the American imagination loves, especially when it can be held up as proof that anyone can make it, while quietly ignoring the systems that make it almost impossible for most. But here's the twist that matters for us. The truth is not that Walker stole everything or that Malone never got credit. The deeper truth is that Black women, plural, were building hair empires at the same time, often learning from and clashing with one another in a world where white companies ignored Black hair entirely. Madonna didn't invent pop music. One musician didn't invent jazz. In the same way, one woman didn't single-handedly invent Black hair care. What Madam Walker did was take that world, step into it with ferocious courage, and turn her section of it into an engine of economic power and activism. And if you're watching this, especially if you're someone building something from nothing, a business, a skill, a new life in a new country, there's something deeply powerful in what she said. I promoted myself. She promoted herself when she was an orphaned child sent to work in another person's house. She promoted herself when she left the cotton fields and picked up the wash tub. She promoted herself again when she put down that wash tub and picked up a little bottle of hair ointment. And she promoted herself yet again when she decided that being just a salesperson wasn't enough. She wanted her own line, her own name on the label, her own factory, her own ground. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for the world to be fair. She didn't wait for her hair to grow back first, or for her accent to soften, or for the racism to disappear. She built anyway. But here's the part that's easy to miss if we turn her into nothing but a girl boss meme. Madam Walker's dream was never just to become rich. At the National Negro Business League, she made it clear, "I want to help other women." She used her platform to call out lynching, to support civil rights lawsuits, to fund schools that trained not just good workers, but leaders. Her sales conventions were not just product trainings, they were rallies for Black pride, discipline, and solidarity. She offered prizes not just for highest sales, but for the agents who gave the most to charity. So when we say from washerwoman to millionaire, we're not just measuring dollars. We're measuring the distance between no options and I'm creating options for thousands of others. And yet, even in the height of her success, she paid a price. The constant travel, the stress of running a growing company, the weight of being a symbol, all of it took a toll on her health. In 1917, she was diagnosed with kidney disease. 2 years later, in 1919, Madam C.J. Walker died at just 51 years old, at her estate in Irvington-on-Hudson. When she passed, her company was valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Newspapers reported on her as the wealthiest black woman in America. Her daughter Alelia took over, turning their New York presence into a beacon of Harlem Renaissance culture, even as the company itself faced the challenges that all empires face when their founding visionary is gone. So what do we do with this story now? A century later, when Madam C.J. Walker is a hashtag, a Netflix series, a case study in business schools, and so many black women still find themselves underpaid, overlooked, and fighting just to get their hair respected in professional spaces, maybe the real power of her story isn't in arguing about who was technically first, or exactly how many dollars she had on what date. Maybe the power is in imagining that laundress in St. Louis standing over a tub of hot water, hands cracked, scalp burning, and realizing, this is not where my story has to end. And maybe the power is also in saying the names that history pushed into the shadows. Annie Turnbow Malone, whose Poro College once trained tens of thousands of women around the world. Mary Ellen Pleasant, who used investments in San Francisco to quietly build a fortune while supporting abolitionist causes. And countless others whose bank balances were never recorded in Guinness, but whose impact rippled through neighborhoods, churches, and families. So here's the question I want to leave with you, and it's not a rhetorical one. I want you to answer it in the comments. If Madam C.J. Walker could promote herself from the cotton fields to the wash tub, from the wash tub to the kitchen, and from the kitchen to owning a factory and an estate on the Hudson, what is the next promotion you owe yourself? Is it starting that business you keep talking yourself out of? Is it enrolling in that course? Is it finally charging what your work is worth? Is it simply believing that you are allowed to want more than survival? Because the system that tried to keep Madam Walker in the laundry room is still here, in different clothes. But so is the spirit that got her out. If this story touched you, if it made you see her as more than just a name on a bottle, as a human being who bled, doubted, failed, tried again, and used her money to lift others, do 2 things for me. First, go to the comments and write, "I promote myself." Let that be your small promise to your future self, the way she made a promise to hers. Second, if you want more stories like this, stories of black brilliance that textbooks gloss over or flatten, make sure you're subscribed to Crowned Black Heroes. Turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this ongoing archive of our true history. And if you haven't yet, hit the like button, not for the algorithm, but so that more people who have never heard the real story of Madam C.J. Walker can find it. From washerwoman to millionaire in 1890s America, from the child of enslaved parents to a woman who wrote her own title in a world that refused to give her one. From Sarah Breedlove to Madam C.J. Walker, her journey is finished, ours isn't, and that's why we tell these stories.